Welcome, everybody. My name is Sean.
Hi, my name's Dave.
Hi, my name is Kayvon.
We're engineers in the Android TV team, and we all work in the Leanback Library. Just a few years back, development on TV was considered difficult, exclusively available to TV manufacturers. But times have changed now, and TVs are starting to evolve at the hands of developers. What's considered a black box running some archaic software is now running our familiar Android OS. If you know how to build apps for Android, you're already ready to build apps for TV. Leanback is the recommended library for building apps on TV. And today, we'll show you how you can use Leanback Library to build some amazing experiences on TV. When building apps for TV, you have to keep in mind users are already used to interacting with TV for a long time. The central guiding principle when building apps for TV is to strike a balance between consistency and flexibility. That is, we want to empower the developer to build unique experiences, while at the same time maintains consistency across apps, thereby eliminate the need for users to learn to use new apps. And if you think about it, Android phones and TVs are not that different. They're both powered by the same Android OS. But there are two key differences that you should keep in mind when building apps. One, TVs don't support touchscreen. And second, users are usually seated a few feet behind the TV. As such, the navigation model for TV is quite different. Usually, you can go top, down, left, right from any given point. In the next 45 minutes, we'll walk you through different components that comes with Leanback Library, the features that we have added to those components, and some of the other underutilized features of existing components. Now, Leanback provides the basic building blocks for UI. It comes with support for cards, rows, list of rows, actions, grids, fragments. Using these basic building blocks, you can build complex UI hierarchies. But not just basic building blocks, it also makes heavy use of transition to guide the user through your flow. Now, no matter what app you're building, you would want to display content in a way that's intuitive and easily accessible. Leanback's answer to this is BrowseFragment. It displays content in a set of rows. It consists of three things. It has the headers fragment to the left, which has the navigation menu arranged in a vertical list. It has the title bar to the top, which displays your branding information in a row. And there is a rows fragment to the right, which displays your content in a set of rows. Now, BrowseFragment does a lot of heavy lifting for you. It runs the transition. It takes care of the coordination between the headers fragment and the rows fragment. It also shows and hides the title view at appropriate times. It is pretty comprehensive. With just a few lines of code, you can get up and running. But you don't want to build a generic app. Build something that is unique, something that has character, something that people can spot from a distance. Next, we'll walk you through different techniques you can employ to make your app unique. But before, this is an example implementation of BrowseFragment. You can see, with just a few lines of code, you have a functional app. All you have to do is set the branding information with a set batch drawable call. Then you load the data and populate the data and set the data in the code by calling the setAdapter method. And finally, you set your listeners. That's all you need to do in order to have a functional app. One caveat you want to keep in mind is, if you want to run the entrance transition, you want to call it the first time you go into your app. We'll talk about this in a little more detail in a later slide. Remember I mentioned headers fragment, which appears to the left, has the list of navigation menus? Now, that is great, but what if you wanted to group your navigation menus? For this, the latest version of Leanback Library has support for two new rows, section row and divider row. Section row, which is the title, marks the beginning of a group of navigation menu. And divider row marks the ending of the group. The way to add them is as simple as when you're adding data to your adapter, you're going to inject those rows in the same order that it appears, that you want them to appear in the headers fragment. That's it. Now, headers fragment is an optional component. You can either enable it or disable it. And by doing so, your app will have a very different look and feel to it. The way to do that is by calling setHeaderState function with either headerState enabled or disabled parameter. Leanback, in an effort to separate styling from logic, makes heavy use of Android theming. every component in Leanback comes with its own theme. Now, if you want to customize a component, all you have to do is create a style that extends from the theme and override the attributes that you care about. Here is an example of a browse fragment. It doesn't even look like a classical browse fragment. Here, we've offset the content to the bottom of the page by using a combination of margin top and padding start. You see, the power of theme is without changing a single line of code, just by overriding 2 attributes, you can give a different look and feel to your app. Leanback comes with an extensive set of styles and themes. We encourage you to take a look at the style file that ships with Leanback and see what makes sense for you to override. The title view, which appears on the top of BrowseFragment, is where you display your branding information. The classical title view displays a search icon, a title, or a logo. Now, that is great. But what if you wanted to display your own custom view? The latest version of Leanback supports custom title view. The first thing you want to do is create a custom view. Second, you want to create a tight layout file, which uses your custom view. And then you want to override the browse title view layout property with the location of your layout file. As soon as you do that, BrowseFragment will pick up the layout you created and render that in the top section of BrowseFragment. As a final step, though, you will have to implement the title view adapter provider interface. The title view adapter interface is what BrowseFragment uses to communicate with your fragment. It's used to tell your view to show or hide itself. Leanback comes with a default implementation of title view, which implements the title view adapter. We encourage you to take a look at the source code and see how that's implemented. We talked to a lot of developers, TV app developers, and there was a growing consensus about the need for further customization. Now, BrowseFragment is great. It displays item in a set of rows. But what if you wanted to do something more custom? Maybe you have a fragment for your phone app that you want to repurpose for your TV app. Or maybe you want to have a completely different representation of your media items. For this use cases, we introduced what's called page row, which is a subclass of row. With page row, you can have your custom fragment rendered inside BrowseFragment. Typically, developers will pair the header item with list row, which represents a collection of items. Now, BrowseFragment internally maintains a registry which maps each row type to a corresponding factory. In this specific case, we map the list row to rows fragment, which knows how to render each individual item in a set of cards in a horizontal grid. For page rows, you want to pair each header item with a page row, and then register your factory with BrowseFragment. Then as soon as BrowseFragment sees a page row, it's going to look into its registry, find out your factory, and then using the factory, it's going to instantiate your fragment, and then render that in the main content area. With that being said, we'll jump into a demo and see this in action.
Thank you, Sean. So here I will demo a new sample app which we developed for Android TV. We just open sourced this app yesterday, and the URL to GitHub will be provided at the end of this presentation. For the demo purposes here, we are using the Android TV emulator. So the home screen of this app is a browse fragment, which consists of a set of different cards. Each card here represents a separate component within Leanback. I will start off this demo by showing different examples of custom fragments. This browse fragment consists of 4 different custom fragments. When I switch between the rows, a different fragment will be loaded each time. The first fragment displays images in a vertical grid. Here, for example, I can navigate images across different rows. The next row is an example of a standard rows fragment that is embedded within a custom fragment. Here you'll see several icons that are organized into multiple rows. The next example shows settings, the setting icons embedded within 2 rows. And finally, we have an example where a web view is embedded within a custom fragment. Unfortunately, the Wi-Fi connectivity is not very great here, so the part that requires network will not play, but just in case, there's going to be a full cool page displayed on the right. So this example shows that we can embed any custom fragment inside the BrowseFragment. You might have also noticed that we have a title view on the top. You can embed any custom widget in here. For example, here we are using a custom layout with a text view and an analog clock. Thanks.
Thanks, Keva. So the demo guys are not in favor of us. Trust me, the web page will load if you embed the web view inside the custom fragment. Anyway, so we talked about custom fragment. Now we'll show you how you can wire your custom fragment inside BrowseFragment, and then we'll show you some snippets of code. Remember I mentioned BrowseFragment has an internal registry which maps each row type to a corresponding factory. Now when you supply a page row, it's going to look into the registry, find the factory corresponding to the page row, and use that factory to instantiate your fragment. Now your fragment must implement main fragment adapter provider. This is the interface that BrowseFragment uses to get hold of main fragment adapter. You may ask, what is that adapter? Well, main fragment adapter is the interface that BrowseFragment uses to communicate with your fragment. For events such as like, I'm starting the animation, or I'm running animation, so the animation is over, things like that. Now there is another optional component called main fragment rows adapter. This is a special case that is only used by BrowseFragment. This is used by BrowseFragment to communicate row-based events so that it can maintain it can sync both the headers fragment and rows fragment. Now, rows fragment comes with the implementation for this adapter. We'll encourage you to take a look at the source code and see how that's implemented. Now, these are all different ways BrowseFragment can talk to your fragment. But what if your fragment wanted to talk to BrowseFragment? For that, we provide fragment host, which represents all possible actions that your fragment is allowed to take on BrowseFragment. Now let's take a look at some code. The first thing you want to do if you want to implement custom fragment is implement fragment factory. All you have to do is override one method, create fragment. Now remember, the data that's passed into create fragment is the currently selected row, which is either a page row or a subclass of page row. So you can typecast that to a page row, and then inspect the data in there, and return the appropriate instance of the fragment. Once you do that, then you want to register your factory with BrowseFragment. And we recommend you do that in the constructor of your class. Next, you want to implement the main fragment adapter provider to return an instance of main fragment adapter. This is the interface that BrowseFragment uses to communicate with your fragment. As a final step, you have to implement the main fragment adapter. Now, BrowseFragment comes with a default implementation of main fragment adapter. But if that doesn't satisfy your need, you can extend from it and override the behavior that you care about. The general pattern for implementing this is the adapter should act like a pass-through to your fragment. Here, we override the set entrance transition state method and then call back into the fragment. The fragment, in turn, based on the Boolean value, sets the visibility of the individual views. So the transition system can notice the difference and run the appropriate transition. It's as simple as that. So that's a lot about custom fragment. Now let's talk about cards. Cards are another key component of Leanback Library. One of the key classes that comes with Leanback is called image card view. That's used to render cards. It consists of two areas. It has the image area, which displays your image on top, and there's the info area at the bottom, which displays your content, such as title and description and an optional icon. Now, whatever app you're building, if you're displaying audio, video, or whatever media you want to display, it'll be displayed in cards. But just because you're rendering everything in cards doesn't mean all your cards will have to look alike. You can have different types of card in the same application. And the way to do that is by creating a style that extends from image card view style and overriding the attribute that you care about. One such interesting attribute is the LV image card view type. This controls what content gets rendered in the card. It takes 4 possible values, title, content, icon right, and icon left. And these are not mutually exclusive. Here are 3 cards with 3 different values for this attribute. The one on the left displays the title in the info area. The one in the middle displays title and the content. And the one on the very right displays title, content, and the icon on the left. You can see, just by creating new styles, you can have different representation for your cards. Another interesting attribute is card type. This controls the positioning of info area in relation to your image area. It has 3 possible values: info under, info over, and main only. And here are 3 cards which uses 3 different values for this attribute. The first one, this is the default configuration. It displays the info area underneath the image view. The second one, info over, lines up the info area with the bottom of the image card. So the info area appears to be on top of the card. And the final one, main only, hides the info area altogether. In this case, you're free to supply any custom layout you want. In this specific case, we are using a custom layout which displays the content to the right of the image. Now, once you create your style, there are 2 more steps you need to do in order to create custom cards. First, you're going to create a theme and override the image card view style attribute with the style you just created. You can choose to override other attributes if you want to. Once you do that, then you can instantiate your image card view and use the theme you just created using context theme wrapper. That's it. That's all you need to do in order to create custom cards. Now, there are other attributes that you can override, you can play around with and see if that kind of like gives you a little more control over the look and feel of the cards. We'll encourage you to take a look at the style files and see what makes sense for you to override. Now, just in case image card view doesn't satisfy your need, you can also look at base card view, which is the base class for image card view, and gives you control over both the layout as well as the content that is rendered on the card. With that being said, we'll jump into a quick demo and show you different kinds of cards.
Next, I'm going to demo different types of cards here. This BrowseFragment shows several variations of image card view and base card view. In the first row, we have image card view, where the title spans a single line. Here we see some examples of this card. The second row displays image card view, where the title spans 2 lines, and the rating icon is to the left. The next row is an example of image card views where all the components are present. We have the image view on top, the title, the rating icon to the left, and the content, which is the price here, to the right. We have more variations of image card views in the next couple of rows. But if these image card views don't satisfy your needs and you need to have more control over the card appearance, here are some advanced examples. In this row, we have examples of base card view with a main-only card type. This one uses a custom layout with the content placed to the right of the image. The next row is another example of base card view with a main-only card type. Here, however, instead of the image on the top, we are using a text view. We have more variations of image card view in the next row. And finally, we have image card view where we have provided the on-focus change listener. You'll notice that the background changes as a card receives focus. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So we talked a lot about like BrowseFragment and custom fragment and cards. Next, Dake is going to talk about the best practices for entrance transition and also talk about some of the other components in Leanback.
Thank you, Sean. Animations. So BrowseFragment is usually inside the first activity of your app, which might take a while to load data. So user will see a blank screen when data is being loaded. If your app loads data row by row, item by item, user might see multiple screen updates during data being loaded. To solve these problems, BrowseFragment has a best practice called entrance transition. This is one of the less known features of Leanback Library I'm going to talk about today. entrance transition gives the user a visual feedback that the data is being loaded. As you can see, there's a spinning icon there. Once the data finishes loading, BrowseFragment will slide content from two sides. Next, Kevin is going to do a demo.
Thank you, Dave. So before we go into the details of the entrance transition, here I will showcase an example entrance transition in Leanback. I will play the BrowseFragment here. You'll notice that we have a sliding transition happening from the opposite sides. The headers fragment is sliding from the left, and the rows fragment is sliding from the right. To capture this transition once more, I will play this demo once again. And here is how it looks. BrowseFragment not only supports entrance transition for rows fragment, but any custom fragments can also take advantage of that. For instance, here, when I open any custom fragment, you'll notice that once the data loading is complete, we'll have similar entrance transition. The rows fragment is sliding from the left, and the custom fragment is sliding from the right. I will play this once more. And with that, Dave will cover the details of entrance transitions.
So let's take a look how your app can use entrance transition. This is a two-step process. First, your app call prepare entrance transition in your fragment on create. This tells BrowseFragment, don't show anything yet until I tell you to do so later. Internally, BrowseFragment will hide the content on the left and hide all the views inside the main area. The next step, once your app loads all your data, you call this start entrance transition. This is a signal tells BrowseFragment that all my data is ready. Now you can start the animation. If you are just using classical BrowseFragment, displaying list of rows, all you need to know is prepare entrance transition and start entrance transition calls. But what if your app has your own custom fragment? To make your custom fragment part of the entrance transition, you need to implement this method inside the main fragment adapter. When BrowseFragment prepare entrance transition, it calls into this method, telling you to hide all the individual views inside your custom fragment. When BrowseFragment starts the animation, it will tell you to show all your individual views through the same method with a different parameter value. Now, we also have these three callbacks. These are optional. Because rows fragments internally, it uses recycle view. You might know that recycle view animation cannot be run together with transition animations. So the rows fragment listens to these callbacks. It disabled animation in on transition prepare. It disabled the layout when transition started. And it re-enabled layout and re-enabled animation when transition finishes. Remember, these are optional. Only if your custom fragment is also using recycle view, you need to listen to these callbacks. Now, because BrowseFragment needs to hide and show views inside your fragment, so your custom fragment needs to let BrowseFragment know your view has been created. You are doing so by calling notify view created on the fragment host object. And also, because your custom fragment usually have your own data, and which can take extra time to load, this data is not the same data inside the BrowseFragment adapter. So remember, you need to call start entrance transition to tell BrowseFragment that all the data inside the browse adapter is ready. So here, your custom fragment need to call additional method notify data ready to tell the BrowseFragment that the data inside your custom fragment is ready. And then BrowseFragment can do the transitions. So to put all the pieces together, we have this sequence diagram. First, your app calls prepare entrance transition in onCreate. Then, BrowseFragment will hide all the header views and don't show anything in the main area. Then BrowseFragment starts to loading data. Once it loads the page row, it will create your fragment from the factory. Next, once all the data inside the BrowseFragment is loaded, it calls start entrance transition. But we cannot start animation yet because your fragment is not ready. So BrowseFragment is waiting for your fragment to call notify view created. So then, BrowseFragment calls set entrance transition state false. This tells your custom fragment to hide all the views inside your fragment. At the last step, once your fragment loads all data, you call notify data ready, and then BrowseFragment calls set entrance transition state true, which tells you to show all the views. Then we can start animation. So we have talked a lot about BrowseFragment today. And in the next section, I'm going to talk about some other fragments in Leanback libraries. If your app wants to interact with user on TV, we recommend you to use this GuidedStepFragment. This is a UX designed for a user sitting 10 feet away from the TV. So the screen is very simple. As you can see, to the left, we call it guidance area. This is the read-only area that prompts user what user can do on this screen. To the right is a list of guided actions. This is the area that user can interact with. Next, Kevin is going to do a quick demo.
So say you want to rent a movie. Here, I will show you an example workflow of doing so using GuidedStepFragment. GuidedStepFragment here presents the user with a sequence of fragments. At each step, it will ask the user to take a set of actions. It will also make it easy for the user to navigate back and forth across all the fragments. So I will start off by choosing the Rent HD version of the movie here. But let's say at this point I change my mind and I want to rent the SD version of the movie instead. I can easily navigate back to the previous screen and select the SD version of the movie here. Here we see an example of a GuidedStepFragment with a drop-down action. I can either choose one of the existing credit cards where I've entered before, or if I want, I can add a new credit card in a new fragment screen. Here we see an example of an editable action where I can enter my credit card number. So I will go ahead and enter my real credit card number. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to pick a valid expiration date. This is an example of a date picker widget provided by Leanback. You'll notice that once the information I entered about my credit card is validated, the OK button is enabled. Next, I will hit the OK button, and I will be directed back to the previous screen where I left off. Next, I will choose the rent, and after the processing is complete, I will be presented with a final screen where I can start watching the movie. You'll see that once I select the Watch Now, GuidedStepFragment will close all the existing fragments, and a new video will start playing. Unfortunately, again, the video will not play here, but believe it, it's going to be a really nice video. And with that, Dave will cover the details of GuidedStepFragment.
Thank you, Keiran. So to create your GuidedStepFragment, you extend from the base class GuidedStepFragment and override these three methods. First, you provide guidance, which is the read-only area to the left. Second, you provide a list of guided actions for the user. And then you respond to user actions and do something for your app. A guided action, it has an ID, which is identified for your program to know which guided action user has interacted with. It has a title and description. So the basic guided action is a click-only action. You can also make the guided action like a radio or checkbox. You can make the title editable, or you can make the description editable, but not both at the same time. Here are some advanced examples: the date picker and a list of sub-actions which implement the drop-down list feature. To use the GuidedStepFragment, you have two choices. You either start the workflow in a separate activity, or you can start the flow in your existing activity. In the first approach, you call add as root in the activity on create. Remember, you only do this when saved instance is now. If your activity is restoring from saved instance, the fragment manager will automatically restore fragment for you. So you don't want to add a duplicate fragment in this case. If your app don't want to use activity, you want to do everything in fragments, that's fine. You can add the guided step on top of your existing content. To navigate between the fragments, you usually do this by responding to user actions and call add function with the new fragment name that you want to navigate to. The fragments are added using backstack entry. So if a user clicks back button on the remote, he will be taken back to the previous screen. But sometimes your app wants to go multiple steps back. You can call this pull back stack with a specific class name of the fragment. Finally, if you want to finish your flow, you call finish GuidedStepFragments. This will close all the GuidedStepFragments. And if your flow was started in a separate activity, it will also close the activity. Settings. So in Android N, we have redesigned the Android TV settings app. It's now like a side panel laying on top of other content. If you want your app also to use the same feature, you can use Leanback settings fragment. This fragment starts with a header view, followed by a list of preference objects. Each preference object has icon, title, a summary. Optionally, the preference object can embed a widget inside it. In this case, it's a switch widget. So I'm not going into the details of settings fragment, but you are welcome to take a look at the sample code in the Showcase app. Playback fragment, playback overlay fragment. When your app trying to play audio or, like say, podcast, then you might use playback overlay control fragment. This fragment usually starts with a playback controls role. With the upcoming release, we provide a support for you to rendering a media item role. A media item role has two parts. To the left is the media item details. It includes the track number, the song title, and duration. To the right, there are multiple clickable actions. To use this feature, your app extends from abstract media item presenter, which is responsible for rendering a role. You override unbind media details. Your media item can be any class. It doesn't need to be like a subclass of role object. So you get the values from your song object and fill that data into the view holder. Optionally, if you want to support the actions to the right of the media item details, you can implement this provider interface and provide a list of actions.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to demo the Playback overlay fragment. This fragment comes with a set of new features which will be available in the upcoming Android N release. Once I open this fragment, the first song will start auto-playing here. I will pause the song for now. OK. So the top section of this fragment is the Playback media player, and the bottom section is the media item rows. All the individual components within this fragment can be customized through themes and styling. For instance, the developers can specify the information about the currently playing song, the primary set of actions such as play or pause, the secondary set of actions such as thumbs up or thumbs down, and on the bottom we have the media item rows. Each media item row can consist of information such as the title of the song, the duration, the artist, and they are followed with a set of optional actions. For the actions here, we are having the add to the playlist button and a favorite button action. In Leanback, we provide listener hooks for either selecting or clicking on each one of these individual components. So let's say I want to listen to a song. I can do that by clicking on the media item details for that song. And that will start playing the song. And say at some point in the middle of the song, I really enjoy this and I want to favorite that song. I can easily navigate back to the song that's playing and hit the favorite button here. That will highlight that row with a different color. It will make it easy for me to later find my favorite list of songs. And that concludes our demo section, and I'd like to hand it over to John.
So we've covered a lot of grounds today. First, we talked about how easy it is for you to get up and running with just a few lines of code using BrowseFragment. Then we showed you different techniques you can employ to give your app some character. Then we showed you how you can plug in your custom fragment inside BrowseFragment. We showed you how to use different kinds of cards in the same application. We talked about the best practices for running entrance transition. We also showed you how you can use GuidedStepFragment to walk a user through a workflow. We showed you the newly styled settings fragment and the newly redesigned playback fragment. Hopefully you get a sense how Leanback tries to provide a comprehensive set of components for supporting different use cases on TV. That being said, we're always interested in listening to developer comments, feedback, suggestion, feature requests. We can't wait to see what you're going to build with the new Leanback library. Thank you very much for coming. Before we go into Q&A, a couple things I want to call out. Our sandbox area is right around the corner. So please come by, say hello, and see this in action if you want to. And the second is, if you guys are watching remotely, then we have a developer community on Google+. Please join the community, and we'll be sharing helpful tips and also helping you solve any problems if you run into there. And we have the Showcase app, which is available on GitHub for cloning. Please play around with it. If you have any questions, suggestions, let us know.
Hey, I have a question about web view. In the beginning, you showed that you now plug in the web view, right? But as I remember the guidelines, you said to avoid using the web views because TV is not for web. So is something changing here, or?
I think you're absolutely right. We don't recommend using web view. There was an example aimed to display the flexibility of custom fragment, what you can do with it. But you're absolutely right. We shouldn't be using web view inside TV app. Any other questions? Yeah, we'll be around in the sandbox area. Please come by.